The hardest part about failing that people battle with is not necessarily the failure, it's the emotion attached to the failure. Because we come from, human beings are social creatures. So that's why you live with your family. You don't live alone. That's why you live in a society and a community. That's why you go to a church. That's why you go to an office. And everywhere you go, when you get there are other human beings. Human beings are social creatures. And a part of being a social creature is feedback. So you have the friends you have because you like the feedback. When you make a joke, they laugh. You go to the places you go to because you like the feedback. So as human beings, we're in a constant system of feedback. When you went to school, at the end of a term, you wrote a test or an exam for feedback. The hardest part about failing is you don't like the feedback because you don't know if you failed or if the business failed, because you are the business, you're the entrepreneur. And so you have to deal with these emotions attached to failure. And then what happens is you start questioning yourself. You start asking questions like, am I really as good as I think I am? Like, am I really this good? Or has it just been my ego this whole time? And then you go back to the time when there was a guy in high school who told you you'd amount to nothing, or an ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend who told you that you would amount to nothing. And you go, maybe they were right. You know what's funny about human beings is if you wrote a test and you got 70%, your mind doesn't see the answers you got right. When you go through the exam paper after you get it back from your teacher, you look for the answers you got wrong. Because that's how we're wired as human beings. So if you have had 100 people tell you you're amazing and 3 people tell you you are useless, you will always remember the 3 people. It's what's called the imposter syndrome. So your internal dialogue starts being framed by negative perceptions of self, by self, based on the perceptions of others. So the real problem with failure is because it supports the 3 people who told you you were worth nothing, not the 97 who told you you're amazing. So for me, that was like the hardest part, right? Like the hardest part was having to understand that I was not that failure, that the failure didn't define me, that it was a moment, it happened, and and I needed to move on from it. And that failing doesn't make you any less of what you were. You're still great, you're still amazing, you're still smart and intelligent and hardworking. You're still all of those things. All of those things about you are true. The event does not define you. It's just an event. You're an athlete that showed up to run a 100-meter race and had a bad race. Doesn't mean you're a bad athlete. You had a bad race.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more. And you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Vusi Thembekwayo, and my take on his top 10 rules to success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, be prepared to walk alone.
I grew up without. I suffered. I was told I'm worthless. Now that I have it, I'm going to show everybody. Because if they affirm to me that I am, then I must be. And it's not until you get to a stage where you realize the affirmation is not necessary, that you're truly free. So as you build your business, I'm telling you now that if it's the external affirmation you're looking for, you're going to sickle. You're not going to get it, guys. It's hard, and it's not unless you walk the journey, right? It's when you are in it that you're like, why don't they get it? Yeah? The world they're losing their minds. Have you ever seen something that nobody else sees, but you know it's there because you can see it? You're like, nah, and you explain it, but they don't see it, right? And in that, the only thing that keeps you sane is if the only affirmation you need is you. So it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Quickly, before we start, I gotta tell you this. I'll tell you why it's counterintuitive. Anthropologists and human science specialists both have studied prisons. prisons are a fascinating thing, right? Because when you're a human being, what we do in this thing called a society, very careful of society, by the way, because society is nothing more than a system of normalized averages. So what it is we all come together and we go, well, for there to be order in any system that can grow exponentially, ergo population growth, we need a system to manage it. And we're going to codify the system, and we're going to call these things good behavior, etiquette, rules, laws. If you break them, we're going to punish you. We have to do it, otherwise there'll be disorder. Like if nobody tells you, sit on the right-hand side of the car and drive on the left-hand side of the road, you're going to sit wherever you want, you're going to drive however you want. And we can't create a society like that. So what society does is it writes these rules, it codifies them, that create the average for the average. The average human being should be like this. That's why your mom says, go to school, get a good education, get a job, get a husband, have 2.5 kids, live in the White House with a picket fence. That's why you're told that, because your mother comes from a society with a system of normalized averages. And then you come up and go, nah, maybe not. Maybe I don't want to finish school. Or maybe I do, but I actually don't want to get a job. I actually want to go through 5 years of not knowing where my next meal is going to come from, because I've got a dream. The minute you break away from society's rules, it'll do exactly what they do to you in prison. So check this out. So you break the law, they send you to prison. Why? Because if we can remove you from broader society, we punish you. Yeah? Human beings, by their very nature, need interaction. This is a vital part of being a human being. When you're in prison and you break the rules, what do they do then? They put you in isolation. So just to be clear, to the strongest, toughest, most evil people of society, the single most powerful form of punishing them is separation. It's not physical punishment. It's I'm going to put you in a hole, alone. That's it. And it will break you. That's why people don't have the courage to walk the path of entrepreneurship. Because the minute you're walking, you're going, holy shit, I'm alone.
Rule number 3, seize the moment.
Leadership is about moments. And what makes great leaders is how they rise to the moment of leadership. You see, you can't lead until the moment actually arrives to lead. It's not built into the ether. It's the moment to lead that's important. The challenge with many of us is when that moment arrives, we question, we doubt, we obfuscate. We go, me? No, not me. What about so and so? Why don't they do it? Why don't they say it? Or worse, we make that terrible statement. It beckons often at the back of our heads. It's like a resounding, grazing, nasal chamber. Why me? Why you? Why not you? It's that old Tibetan saying, which was translated into English. If not you, who? If not now, when? The moment of leadership is critical. And what people often misunderstand is the moment of leadership often goes to the people who don't have the position and they don't have the power, but they exercise the influence.
Rule number 4, remove your ego.
I'm going to give you some advice somebody gave me when I was much younger, and it's probably the most valuable piece of advice I ever got. When you're building a brand, you can't afford to have an ego. You got to do whatever it takes to build it. Yeah, you know, I'm going to tell you guys who actually gave me that advice. True story, George Sombonos. George Sombonos is passed now. He used to run a company called Chicken Licken. And true story, I was in the Johnny Walker had a prize that they used to give to successful entrepreneurs, right? And George is in the running to win the prize. And I get to him, I'm like, this is good as nice. And he's wearing this like old shoddy suit, and I'm looking at him going, are you as good as nice? It's good. And I'm like, are you that guy? Because he didn't look, he's a short guy. I'm like, it doesn't look like him. So we end up chatting, and true, 2 weeks later, I'm driving past a Chicken Licken on William Nicol, and I'm hungry. This was before I had a specialized eating plan, you know? So I was like, let me pull in. So I pull into the Chicken Licken to buy some food. And I see this guy picking up papers outside the Chicken Licken. There's a bit of litter and and I'm like, that looks like George. I can't be George. Like, this is the guy, he owns the franchise. He can't be picking up, and it was him. So I go through the drive-through. At the time I had it was my first car, Toyota Run-X. So I finished buying, I go through the drive-through and I pull up in the parking and he remembered me. He's like, hi, George. He's like, yeah, Vusi, I remember you. I said, why are you picking up papers? He says, what do you mean? He was genuinely puzzled. I'm like, why are you picking up papers? He says, no, because they are here. This is my shop. And the papers, they need to be picked up, right? Because in my mind, I'm like, I would have come in and gone, Elon, Ela, Ewen. There's papers, that's what I would have done, right? I wouldn't, But he's genuinely puzzled at me being puzzled that he's picking up papers. So I'm like, but you own this whole thing. And at the time, I think he had like 120 or 130 franchises. I'm like, you own this thing. Why would you pick up papers? And he said to me, when you're building a brand, you can't afford an ego. Yeah. He says, because the customer that drives past doesn't go, who picked up the papers? They just go, are the papers picked up, yes or no?
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, learn from the past.
I love my country, I do. But I think one of the things that holds us back as South Africans is we love to pretend the past didn't exist. In fact, it's a South African pastime. We're really good at this. We're really good at pretending our past is an imagination, a manufacture of people that are trying to push a certain political agenda. The reason we do this is because if we pretend for a moment it wasn't as bad as they say, or we pretend for a moment it wasn't as vast as they say, then we don't have to own the responsibility of what that past has brought into our present. Consider for a moment, if you will, your life today is nothing more than a manifestation of events in the past. Your perspective, your education, your history, your financial background, the decisions you're making, where you live, all of that is predetermined by the history of where we come from. Those of you here who are in South Africa because you come from Zimbabwe are probably here because of the most recent history of your own country. As a Zulu man, I know that I owe my lineage not only to the Zulu people, but also the Swazi people. That's my birthright. It is a split of my lineage. And even at a personal level, I own that I am in Gauteng because it is a migrant province. The history of how my grandfather, my great-grandfather first moved here. Moving from Swaziland and then moved into Mpumalanga, from Mpumalanga into Alex, from Alex into Benoni. That history is predetermined by the fact that this province is a migrant province. I cannot stand here, 32-year-old man, educated with a master's from the UK, and say to you, well, I am just because I am. Rubbish. Bullshit. I am because the history of the people who have brought me to the space I am in has predetermined where I am today. If you want to understand how you fix the future, you first need the courage to confront the past.
Rule number 6, innovate.
When I was in school and I was studying innovation, we were taught about different types of innovation, right? So there's a breakthrough innovation, there's incremental innovation, there's a moonshot, there's a hack, a sandbox. Like, we all know about innovation theory, right? But there's also an innovation that actually nobody tells you about. You know what it's called? Useless innovation. I'll give you an example. So I see banks in South Africa now having a pissing contest about who can take a card, which is traditionally rectangular and in the horizontal, and make it vertical. How is this an innovation? I'm really, really confused. Like, how is this an innovation? In a South African context where the majority of the population is either unbanked or underbanked, where the interest rate are prohibitively high for people to participate in the formal economic system, where the banking infrastructure allows or disallows a lot of people who live in rural and peri-urban areas access into the banking community, and where a majority of the people who live in South Africa are not part of the formalized economy, instead of solving that problem, you guys are really worried about whether or not the card is vertical or horizontal. How about for the middle class, where many of the old traditional banks have different systems running different parts of the bank, and they don't talk to each other, so you can't have a single view of the organization. You guys are really worried about, is the card horizontal or vertical? I just want to say this to you, right? So watch now what's going to happen when there is this whole drive about, is it a vertical card, is it a horizontal card, just watch what's going to happen. Everybody's going to jump up and down in a big contest about who can introduce a vertical card first. Banks, let me just share something with you as a client. Nobody cares. Like, actually, just nobody cares if your card is horizontal or vertical. We care if you give us access to financial services that are well priced, if you give the majority of the population access to the financial system, if you can diversify your product portfolio. That's the stuff that's important. Is the card vertical or horizontal? Give me a break.
Rule number 7, become influential.
I think we're in a moment where you and I are called to lead. Now, here's the thing about leadership, which I think most people misunderstand, is the assumption that leadership is based on a position and the presumption that leadership requires power. Neither of those are true. What leadership actually requires is influence. And no matter where you sit, whatever your vantage point, no matter how low or high in the mountain bed of opportunities, all of us have influence. How will you influence? That's the question I want to ask you right now. How will you influence? Let's draw some inspiration from sport. I'm a petrol head. Anything that burns petrol, I'm very passionate about. I race cars. I race in the V12 series. I'm very good, if I do say so myself. But the one sport I've never been able to get into is bike racing. A couple of reasons, but the most is I just can't understand how you would go that fast in anything that doesn't have a seatbelt. Makes no sense to me. Many years ago, I was working on my first book, The Magna Carta of Exponentiality. And as part of the book, I got to interview motorbike racing drivers. I interviewed the top 4 in the world at the time: Marc Marquez, Valentino Rossi, Casey Stoner, and Jorge Lorenzo. And I asked each of them a very simple question. What makes you the best? See, you got to think about sports that are formulaic in their construct. That means all of us that compete in the game have exactly the same rules. Think, for instance, about Formula One. The reason it's called Formula One is because all the teams get given a formula. You can't just do what you want. So they tell you the size of car, weight of car, the composite materials you can use to build a car. They even tell you the type of tires your car can ride on. They'll tell you the size of the engine, this thing called a capacity or displacement. Even the technology of the engine, naturally aspirated, turbocharged, or supercharged. The drivers in the cars, they generally get given a median, average weight, average height. So at the beginning of a season, when you see all the cars lined up on the track, recognize something. Everybody has the same inputs. It's the same formula. If this is true, and it is, then explain to me why Lewis Hamilton is arguably the greatest driver of our generation. Explain to me why Michael Schumacher was probably the greatest driver of all time. Explain to me why Senna is the most revered driver ever to grace the track. It's because there are some people where even though the construct and the rules are fixed, their influence is disproportionate. And that's what leadership is. It's about influence.
Rule number 8, leave your legacy.
Now what?
Now what?
Yeah, I feel like, so God's been good, right? And I say this to people all the time. I'm just the vessel doing the work. Now what? Like, okay, so where do I go now? What's next? What am I trying to leave behind? So I'm very much at the now what part of my life, which is about legacy. It's when Vusi's not in the room, what's left. Because it's not, it's not the Patek Philippe watches, it's not the cars we drive, it's not the places we live in, it's not the people we holiday with, the places we holiday. It's more than that. And I'm trying to answer that question. So that your thing about brand, and I say this to my team all the time, which is, even in the construct of brands, we must always recognize that we will never be the equal of the brand. And this is what many people who build brands get wrong. So particularly people who do personal branding. So they go, well, I'm a great X, I'm a great comedian, a great singer, a great actress, a great whatever. So you become this brand thing, but you forget that a brand is something that lives in people's mind, which is to say your existence becomes a manifestation of somebody else's expectation. Now, most people are bad at the expectation part. So they think you're still in charge. You're not in charge anymore. This thing called a brand now outlives you. It's a bit like building a Lego set. You just build the pieces. What people will do with this Lego set is up to you. And that's kind of how I think about my life.
That is such a hard truth.
It is, right?
It is such a hard truth.
And by the way, the most powerful brands are the ones that the people who construct don't own. When you cease ownership, that's when you've built a brand, because it means that there's somebody on the other end who's gone, this thing is so powerful. Not only do I want to be a part of it, I want to help build it. There is I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche that said that true power finds expression in the absence of power, which is to say, when I can give power away and still have power, I have power.
Number 9, achieve excellence.
I was explaining to my son that where I come from, we were taught to appreciate and understand that it wasn't the size of the home that was important. It was the condition in which that home was kept. And that the condition in which that home was kept was not a reflection of the economics of that home. The condition in which that home was kept was not a reflection of the economics of that home. It was a reflection of the quality and standard with which the people in that home held themselves. That even if you had one shirt, it was washed and ironed every day. That even if you're like me, you only had a single pair of school shoes, you polished it every day, because the polish not only made it shine, but it protected it from wear and tear and gave it a longer life. That you knew ukuthi buwena ubukoropa ngaphandle, ubufrefi stupu. You know the smell of Mr. Min and Handy Andy. You are still there, comrades. Excellence is not a concept foreign to us. Excellence is in our DNA. And so what's important for you and I is to remember this. Ningazilibali ukuba nizalwa ngobani. Because where we come from, what we represent is far, far stronger than anything we have done. Before I love and leave you, let me end by saying this. I am of the view that the history has not yet been written. The stories have not yet been told. The fables have not yet been imagined, nor tales foretold about the capabilities of Africans. It's still not been written. Yours and my task and my generation is seized with making real a history that will be told about a new Africa. One that brought to the world innovation and one that held itself to a standard of excellence.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is be resilient.
There are some things that you can't wish away. We're in the dead of winter right now. You could go on your knees, close your eyes, and look up to the beautiful South African skies and pray to whichever God you praise, and ask that God that the temperature of the day should change, and it won't, because the season is winter. And life is exactly the same. The seasons are presented as they are. If there must be feast, there will be famine. If there must be prosperity, there will be moments of poverty too. The difference is not which season we go through, but the difference is our consistency as we go through those seasons. And so the final note for you to think about as a young person today is to be consistent in your resilience. Because it's easy to be nice when things are good. It's easy to be liked when you're not speaking the truth. Resilience, leadership, finding the moment, accelerating through those corners, and being the pilot that's able to fly through the storm. all of those require the singularity of truth. So rethink for yourself what you stand for. Reframe for yourself what this moment is about. And restart to yourself the contribution you'll make to society. Typically, when we're in business, there are some service lines or product lines which make more margin, more profit than others. So the natural proclivity for business leaders is to focus on the service lines that make more money and kind of abandons the ones that don't. And in the US, General Motors, Daimler, Chrysler, and a couple of other players who were making very big, what they call trucks in the US, these very big cars, Jeep, right? And they were making a lot of money on the big cars. And then on the small cars, they were making a little bit of money. So they thought, well, you know, and then Toyota came into the US, and Toyota started selling cars in the US, and they were competing with these companies on the small cars. And all of them, General Motors, Jeep, Ford, were like, yeah, it's too little profit. So we leave it, and we let Toyota do it. It's the biggest mistake I watch entrepreneurs make, and business leaders make it too. It's called seeding market in areas that are non-core. And what you do is, if you seed market in areas that are non-core, you give your competitor time to breathe and room to grow. Because then what happens is Toyota now owns that area of the market without competition. Which means even if they make a tiny bit of margin, they don't have to worry about a competitive short-term dynamic. So immediately what happens is they start thinking differently. They start investing more money.
And then they build capital to take you on in another area.
And you know where they'll go? Because it's the innovator's dilemma. They don't make enough margin here. So where will they go? They go up. In other words, you left them in the small space to focus on the big space. What you didn't realize was you were giving them room to build up capital so they can fight you in the big space. So Toyota starts migrating up, right? So Toyota starts making bigger cars. They do it first with what was called a Sienna. Then they made the Camry, which we know in South Africa very well. They made the Cressida, which we know in South Africa very well. And all they were doing was they were migrating up to larger cars. Now, the problem with Toyota was they were making their cars in Japan, exporting them to America. And for the American person, or the average US person, it was still a Toyota. It represented reliability and quality, but it didn't quite represent opulence and luxury. And they were making really good cars. So one day, the story is told like fable, but they're sitting in a board meeting. And one day they're having a conversation about what are we going to do with this problem? And they thought the problem was about pricing. And out of nowhere, a little voice from the back said, this is not a pricing problem, it's a brand problem. We've built a brand that represents one thing. We have a market that associates our brand with one thing. We're trying to sell them something different. So we should just, rather than change the car, just change the logo on the car.
So that even if the car is amazing and brilliant and it fights the Mercedeses and the BMs,
100%.
The fact that it's still called a Toyota,
it's a Toyota,
is what's stopping us. So let's change it.
You know how you know when you're driving the wrong cars? If I ask you what car you drive and you tell me the derivative, not the brand. So if I said, what do you drive? You drive GT, you say I drive a GT86. You don't tell me I drive a Toyota Coupe.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Because the person who drives an Aston Martin doesn't go, I drive a DB9 or a Vanquish. He asks, what do I drive? I drive an Aston Martin.
I drive a Bentley.
Do you get it? I drive a Bentley. I don't need to tell you if it's a Mulsanne or if it's Continental or it's a Bentley.
Okay, so you say a little voice in the boardroom spoke up.
So the voice says, change the logo. And they go, what do we call it? Well, and they go through this process. And the answer was, what is it? It's a luxury product. What do? We export it. And to whom? To the US. So what is this thing? It's a luxury export to the US.
Lexus.
It's a Lexus. We'll just call it a Lexus. And they created the brand Lexus. And now today, Lexus is the third largest luxury brand in the US.
Thinking simply, using what you have, and keeping your eye on the prize.
I watch entrepreneurs make this mistake all the time. They don't win market share. They think the problem is the product. Sometimes the problem is what people think the product is. You just got to change the brand of the product. The thing's fine, it works. You get an HP and an Apple do exactly the same thing, right? But you pay a 40% premium on the other because you associate something with the brand. What I've become very good at, I think, is understanding what you call the golden thread, which is the why for me. And my why always is that I told you this last time we spoke, is I'm an elevate guy. So I'm not the person you bring in when you want somebody to steady the ship. I'm the guy you bring in when the ship is a bit too steady and you want somebody to F things up and you want to elevate people's level of ambition, their drive, their goals. I do it in different ways, whether I'm on a platform speaking or I'm writing a book or I'm investing in an entrepreneur. Whatever I do, if the minute I get involved, the outcomes get elevated because that's what I bring, right? And so I think it's important for people to, rather than ask the question, should I focus on one thing or do many things, The question should be, what do I want to be in my eulogy? When I'm no longer here and somebody's standing in front of my peers and friends and haters, and they're telling the story of my life, what do I want them to say? Because usually what you'll notice is if you start with the end in mind, then your purpose becomes very clear. You know, you'll write down the stuff that matters to you just instinctively. I want people to say that I did X and I did Y and I did Z. Well, then do X and Y and Z. That's the stuff you should be focusing on.
The single most important part of the momentum equation is movement, right? So I'll give you an example. Here's how I explain this to people. So if you're driving your car and for some other strange reason, you know, the car stalls and you're stuck, right? You have one of two things you can do, right? And let's imagine you're in a, cell phone black zone. You can't phone anybody. You get one or two things you can do. Sit in the car, switch on your hazards, and pray somebody's going to come past you. That's what we call the charity approach. Hi, I'm here. I grew up poor. I didn't get a good education. Help. It completely gives the power to the person on the other side of the equation, which is I feel like I want to help, and here's how much I'm willing to help with, right? Flash the hazards. The alternative is you open the driver's door, you drop the handbrake, you put your shoulder behind the chassis, and you push. Now, when you start pushing, the hardest part is going to be that initial meter because the car is completely still. It's got no momentum. So you start pushing. And what happens is 5 meters down the line, 10 meters down the line, assuming the road is flat, of course, all of a sudden you're not pushing as hard as you were, you're just maintaining momentum. So the reason I always say to people, start, is because the hardest part is the beginning. My dad used to say to me, you will always be the worst at something the first time you do it. So the results you get the first time you do it are not the true results. That was the worst version of you doing that thing. That's the first time you sing, first time doing public speaking, first time you try to do a comedy set. First time you do anything is the worst time because you don't have the skill set. But as you do it, what happens is you mature, you get better, and you learn, right? So that's what I mean by that is the reason it's important to start is because all of those stories, that self-narrative that you've been saying and toiling in your head, the excuses are valid, the world isn't fair, but guess what? At the beginning, it is going to be tough. But the only way out of it is to start. There is no other way out of it. You can't negotiate with it, right? It's let me just one last thing for you to think about. So I said this to an entrepreneur literally today who came to see me about this very thing. And she was saying to me, look, business, it's COVID, it's been a tough time, yada, yada. And I said to her, if you went to, imagine, the Empire State Buildings. I said to her, if you went to the top of the building and stood at the ledge, prayed to whichever God you praise, God, Buddha, Allah, and told them that you don't believe in gravity and jumped, you'd find that gravity believes in you, right? So I was saying to her, the environment in the moment we're in is gravity. You can't negotiate your way out of it, right? What you can do is you can get started with who you need to be to survive this moment. And what she was doing, which is what I think a lot of people do, is they hang on to who they used to be, right? So I used to be well, that's not working anymore. So who do you need to be? And get started on that journey. I really, honestly, firmly believe in the school of starting. Starting, I think, is often more important in the entire momentum construct than everything that comes after that.
If you study people who are at the pinnacle of anything, you recognize that to get there, motivation was maybe 1% of the formula. Maybe. 1%. And I'll prove it to you. If you want to become a world-class bodybuilder, say an IFBB pro, what that takes is you have to train twice a day, 6 days a week. You have to have 8 meals a day. Your calorie intake is regimented. Your meals are pre-planned and pre-cooked. You don't eat according to taste, you eat according to function. So my trainer, for instance, will eat and I'm going, what are you eating? And he's having he'll have chicken that was boiled without salt. And he'll have like half a kilo of it. I mean, what are you doing? He says, I'm taking in protein. He doesn't say I'm eating. He says, I'm taking in protein. For him, it's functional. It's not taste-based. Then you would probably have to train for a minimum, and this is if you are a genetic phenom, you'd have to train for a minimum of 10 years before you could get on a stage and compete at an average level with an average global bodybuilder. Average. Okay. So why am I telling you this? All of us here at the beginning of a new year write these things called New Year's resolutions. And then New Year's resolutions, number 1, make more money. Yeah? Number 2, change my boyfriend. Number 3, get into shape. Yeah? Number 3, get into shape is somewhere in the top 3. So what do? You go to the gym, you get a gym membership. Yeah? You go to the local Nike store and you buy like all of your gym gear. You are motivated. You are inspired. You are going to the damn gym. You go to YouTube, you subscribe to all of the fitness channels. You go to your Instagram, you follow all of the fitness models. You are motivated. You are going to the damn gym. You're going to get in shape. That's what you're going to do. The people you're following on YouTube have been working on for a minimum of 5 years to look like that. So you have the incorrect understanding that after a month of working out, you're going to look like them. So what happens in the first month? You're excited. You go to gym every single month, and you take the pains and your body is sore, but I'm excited. I'm going to gym. Then life happens. Company doesn't make money. You don't make your targets. You fall a bit ill. Something happens. And all of a sudden you stop going to gym for a day. A day becomes 2, 2 becomes a week. Now all of a sudden you've had a gym membership for 3 months and you haven't been in that time. What did you miss? You thought motivation was the formula. Winners don't need motivation. Winners need discipline. Discipline's about getting it done because it needs to get done, not because I feel like it, not because I'm motivated for it. You think Nelson Mandela was motivated to spend 27 years in prison? You think Martin Luther King was motivated to march across the states and proclaim freedom? You think, if you look at people that change the world, they're not doing it because they're motivated. They're doing it because they made a commitment to do it and they disciplined to see it through. Discipline is far more important than motivation, which is why you've got to be careful the decisions you make, because once you make the decision, you have to see that decision through. Like my mentor says, first we make the decisions, then the decisions make us. So you've got to be very careful the decisions you make, be very careful the commitments you make. Motivation, I'm telling you now, is completely overrated. It's important, don't get me wrong. We meet according to motivation, we feel good, rah-rah, but that'll fade. You need a stronger will and a deeper commitment to see things through.
The first thing I say to anyone who says, I want to become a speaker, is it's like wanting to become a singer. Sing, right? So the practice and the iteration is the single most important. Mina, when I started, I did a lot of work pro bono. So I'd get invited by Rotary clubs and I'd go and speak at places because I wanted to get into the application of the skill so I could get better at it, right? So there is a difference between being a paid speaker and a speaker. So the first thing I say to people is just speak. If you get invited to speak at your kids', graduation ceremony, go. If you get invited to speak at church, do it. If you get invited to MC a friend's wedding, do it. Start practicing this thing you want to do.
My dad did a style of martial arts called Kyokushinkai. And I suppose as a little boy trying to get close to dad, I was like, well, if he's doing it, I'm going to join him. So my dad and I shared this incredible passion of martial arts and cars, right? So I kind of get started, with my father. Then he gets gunned down when I'm 13 years old. And I went through like a year of just nothing. I couldn't show up at the dojo. I didn't have it in me. And I did all the things we're talking about. The excuses. At the time, South Africa had a particularly high crime problem. And I was like, what's the point? Here's a first-degree black belt who gets attacked. He takes 9 bullets and he's dead anyway. Why am I going to this thing called the dojo, right? Again, excuse is valid. It really is. But there's no progress. So a year, nothing. And then I was like, I actually miss it. So I went back. It was interesting when I went back, it wasn't the same. I wasn't doing the kata to impress the senseis anymore. I was doing the kata because I wanted every single movement to be as close to flawless as I could get it. It changed my entire perspective. So, and one of the things that happened, you're going to love this. I'm literally getting chills thinking about it. One of the things that happened is time just expanded. So, because we have a very finite construct of time, I'm going to be at the dojo for an hour. But what happened was that hour felt like 5 hours, and sometimes 30 minutes felt like 5. All of a sudden, this fixed construct of time, it started to change because my relationship with what I was doing changed. So it wasn't just a punch. It wasn't just the kata. I wasn't just showing up for the emotion. I was embedded in every single part of the process. I was looking for growth, for progress, right? I have to tell you, that changed my entire life. So anytime I find myself stuck now, I recognize that often the reason I'm stuck is because I'm focusing on the output and I'm not focusing on my input, right? So output, I've got to raise 100 million rand for my business. Output, I've got to get 300% growth for, in customers. Output, I've got to get 25. Yeah, that's all output. But what you got to focus on is input. What are the things I've got to do, and how do I do those things intentionally, deliberately, and try to get better every single time? Every meeting, every impact conversation with one of my staff members, every engagement with a client or a potential client, every single one of those things. How do I focus on that moment? Because actually the output is a sum total of how those things come about. So when you are at the dojo and you are being graded and you are going through the process of trying to attain your black belt or your brown belt, that's what everybody sees as the output. But what actually went in was that malleable construct of time where you were trying to perfect every single movement.
I have come to realize that there are no perfect decisions, but decisions that I make perfect.
Yeah.
That is something else that I loved reading in your book.
Yeah.
Walk me through that garden.
Again, right? So remember, you're in this journey. You're doing this thing called life. You're building this thing called a business. You're in pursuit of this end goal called profit, and somewhere in between it, the pursuit of purpose. You're trying to create a better workplace for your people, a place where they can come and belong. You want to serve communities. You want to better the lives of customers. There are 1,000 things you want to do. And so we go to business schools, and business schools, particularly the ones I went to, teach you about, they give you case studies and they go, this business leader did X and that business leader did X. And there's like this literature that says they make perfect decisions. Then when I spend time with business leaders, I realize they don't. Most of them just make a decision.
Yeah.
And they're comfortable in the knowledge that decisions are meta by their nature, which is to say, I'm going to get on the freeway and just go from one place, I'm going to another.
Yeah.
In my head, I kind of have a path of how I'm going to get there. But if on the way there's traffic, I'm going to change the route. If I hit a pothole, I'll stop and fix.
But I'm going there.
But I'm going to get there.
So fig.
And this is the thing about the perfect decision rather than the decision made perfect. The decision made perfect builds into it the assumption and the knowledge that I'm going to get things wrong. And I'm comfortable with getting things wrong. Because it's when you think you have to make perfect decisions that you get into the most dangerous thing leaders do. Ego, bravado, knowledge, arrogance, this walk in and like, I own it. No, you don't.
So we've always done it this way.
No.
Yeah.
Like, you're a part of a process. You're a servant. Sit down. So I did martial arts, I did music, I played the violin, etc. But everything else I did is as a result of the martial arts.
Of course he plays the violin. Of course he plays the violin.
Because, yeah, I mean, you know, the idea that you've got to do your kata over and over and over and over and over, same movement, same rotation. Even today as an entrepreneur, when you build a business, you've got to do the simple things over and over and over. And it is in the application of it is in the iteration and application that excellence is achieved. And I think that's what people don't understand. So people go, so how do you get to number one of the thing? You actually just have to do the simple things, but do them every day religiously and each time with a consistent discipline. That's the mark. That's how you get there.
When we do, and I do a fair amount of sales training with my own team here, but I often talk about, we don't close here. So we don't close a sale, we open a relationship. So the way we lead the sales process is the whole time we're having a conversation with you to give you a sense of why you would benefit by having a relationship with us. This has nothing to do with whether or not you buy from us. This is just like, we want to have a relationship with you. And we have that relationship by offering these products, which we believe suit this need of yours. And by the way, it's connected to the things you find important. If these are the things you find important, because we do, then we should sustain this relationship for a period of time. And we do that by having you sign this contract. So we really, you know, and I've spent a lot of time with my sales team going, don't close a sale. People should never feel like you've closed anything. They should rather feel like they've become part of something, part of a family, part of a movement, part of something that matters, something that's going to make a difference, right? Especially today's world with millennials, you know, who don't buy
stuff based on value. They buy stuff based on values. So what you really want to make sure is that you open the sale. I think public speaking taught me that kind of instinctively, because in public speaking, what you're doing is you're communicating a very complex set of ideas as simply as possible. And you're doing it in the hope that that it's going to inspire action. So, when Martin Luther King said, I have a dream that one day the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to break bread on the table of brotherhood. The first thing he did is he used imagery, because the minute the mind can see it, then you're closer to doing it, right? But the second thing he does is says, I have a dream. Towards the end of the speech, if you listen to it, he says, we need a messaging to the United States that says that you guys have issued us this check for the promises you've made, but this check has returned saying no money in the bank account. So he says, even though I have this dream, if the system or the situation doesn't allow for this dream to be actualized, it's not going to be actualized. And that works. That's really, really an effective way of doing it. So I would say to anybody who's in a sales process, particularly people who are entrepreneurs, because if you're an entrepreneur, you're selling every day, is you don't close a sale, you open a relationship. And you open a relationship in the same way you would when you want to date someone, by going, I like you. I think we have a bit of chemistry. I think this thing could go somewhere. But I think, so what do you say about a date? Then at the end of the first date, you go, what do you say about a second one? Right? That's kind of, in our firm, that's kind of how we think about building relationships with clients. It's just, you see the world in this way. We see the world in this way. What do you say we go on a date? Let's try something together. And that opening of relationships is far more sustainable because, by the way, just one final thing. Every time you close a sale, notice what you have to do is you have to make a hard promise. You never close a sale without making a hard promise. So before you close a sale, you go through the promising stage where you go, I promise my product or my business is going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you open a relationship, you don't really make a promise. You make a commitment. You kind of go, I commit that I'm going to be available, that I'm going to do the best I can, that I'm going to make sure that I'm going to do the best I can to make sure that we succeed. But a commitment is different because a promise is final. A commitment allows for latitude. So in a commitment where you fail, you can be honest and go, I thought it would, but it didn't work, or there's a problem here, or it's a mechanical issue. And because you've opened a relationship, people are a lot more forgiving than if you made very hard promises trying to close a sale, and now this thing doesn't do what you said it would do 6 months in. I say this to my team all the time, which is, even in the construct of brands, we must always recognize that we will never be the equal of the brand. And this is what many people who build brands get wrong. So particularly people who do personal branding. So they go, well, I'm a great X, I'm a great comedian, a great singer, a great actress, a great whatever. So you become this brand thing, but you forget that a brand is something that lives in people's mind, which is to say your existence becomes a manifestation of somebody else's expectation. Now, most people are bad at the expectation part. So they think you're still in charge. You're not in charge anymore. This thing called a brand now outlives you. It's a bit like building a Lego set. You just built the pieces. What people will do with this Lego set is up to you. And that's kind of how I think about my life.
That is such a hard truth.
It is, right?
It is such a hard truth.
And by the way, the most powerful brands are the ones that the people who construct don't own. When you cease ownership, that's when you've built a brand.
Tasha's. Exactly.
Because it means that there's somebody on the other end who's gone, this thing is so powerful. Not only do I want to be a part of it, I want to help build it. And that's hard. I imagine you're a lot like me. Like what are we doing now? So,
and also you still want, because it's Anele, you still want Anele to be making the decisions, right? So yes. So basically you are teaching us that when you know that you can comfortably start releasing the power.
Let go.
That's when you know that you've been successful.
True. There is I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche that said that true power finds expression in the absence of power. Which is to say, when I can give power away and still have power, I have power. I think the mistake many of us make when we're trying to close a sale is we act like salespeople, right? So there's something counterintuitive about sales training, which is you learn everything you learn in sales so that you can do it instinctively and intuitively rather than do it off a script. So if you come across to a client as if you're doing something for a script, they immediately feel as if they're being sold to. And just like you do when you're watching a TV ad, you get up and go make popcorn. because nobody wants to be sold to. As human beings, we've built up such a high emotional resistance to being sold stuff, because we're being sold every day. You're on your IG and there's pop-up sponsored ads. You're on Facebook and there's sponsored ads. You're driving on the highway and there's a billboard. You just, if you get to your emails and you've filled up with spam, somebody's always trying to sell you something. So as human beings, we've built up such an emotional resistance and a cognitive resistance to selling that the best way to sell is not to. The best way to sell is to understand the mechanics of selling, understand how it actually works, but then do it in a way that is just instinctive and intuitive for you. And the only way to do that is through practice.
I live by two core principles, right? The first is that everything everyone knows, they learned. And I don't accept that I'm less intelligent than the next person, which means I can learn it too, right? The second is that every single excuse I have is valid, but that's still not going to give me the results that I want. And so we do live in this really PC culture today, where people are looking for the excuse. And the truth is, the excuse is completely valid. Yes, you are a young black person growing up in democratic South Africa for the past 26 years, but for hundreds of years before that, it wasn't built for you to succeed. Right? Yes, you're living in one of the most difficult credit capital markets in the world, so it's hard to get access to funding to start a business. Yeah, all of that stuff's true, but that's still not going to change your circumstance. So the test is not whether or not you know the reasons for not succeeding. The test is whether or not you're willing to do whatever it takes to get to that next level. And a big part of the whatever it takes actually is just remain teachable. Just be a student of the game, a student of life, a student of those who've achieved. And I've found that those two things have really stood me in good stead.
If you follow any pursuit or endeavor, any form of conquest, sports, business, arts, culture, anything where human beings endeavor to perform better than other human beings, there's something called the law of averages, which is that there are people who are below the average, but the average person fits into this big bowl in the middle called average. Then you get this tiny little group of people at the top. My fascination has always been with the people at the top. Think about the world's fastest man of all time, Usain Bolt. So is Usain Bolt the world's fastest man because he's more talented than anybody else? Or is he the world's fastest man because he has a genetic advantage? Or is he the world's fastest man because he has the best training? Is he the world's fastest man because he has access to the most advanced science? Or is he the world's fastest man because of all of those, and he's only 1% better than everybody else? I learned that I didn't have to be 100% better than everybody else. I didn't even have to be 10% better than everybody else. I only had to be 1% better than everybody else at everything. Go watch Sean Roden when he won Mr. Olympia. I'll never forget, there's that shot of Sean Roden coming out and there's the light from the back and you see Sean Roden's waist this big and his shoulders that big and that beautiful arch up, right? Now, you're probably watching this going, why the hell is Vusi talking about bodybuilding? Let me tell you why I love things like bodybuilders and athletes. It's because they have to train tens of thousands of hours to make that 1% improvement. That additional 1% is tens of thousands of hours more than the 99% of the people beneath you. So if you're busy studying for an exam, if you want to be right at the top of your pile, you got to make sure that you put in more hours. If you're training, you got to do that too. You're running a business, you got to be up earlier, sleep later, work harder when you're in it.
All of us here at the beginning of a new year write these things called New Year's resolutions. And then New Year's resolutions, number one, make more money. Yeah? Number two, change my boyfriend. Number three, get into shape. Yeah? Number three, get into shape is somewhere in the top three. So what do? You go to the gym, you get a gym membership. Yeah? You go to the local Nike store and you buy like all of your gym gear. You are motivated. You are inspired. You are going to the damn gym. You go to YouTube, you subscribe to all of the fitness channels. You go to your Instagram, you follow all of the fitness models. You are motivated. You are going to the damn gym. You're going to get in shape. That's what you're going to do. The people you're following on YouTube have been working out for a minimum of 5 years to look like that. So you have the incorrect understanding that after a month of working out, you're going to look like them. So what happens in the first month? You're excited. You go to gym every single month, you know, and you take the pains and your body is sore, but you know, I'm excited. I'm going to gym. Then life happens. Company doesn't make money. You don't make your targets. You fall a bit ill. Something happens. And all of a sudden you stop going to gym for a day. A day becomes two becomes a week. Now all of a sudden you've had a gym membership for 3 months and you haven't been in that time. What did you miss? You thought motivation was the formula. Winners don't need motivation. Winners need discipline. Discipline's about getting it done because it needs to get done, not because I feel like it, not because I'm motivated for it. You think Nelson Mandela was motivated to spend 27 years in prison? You think Martin Luther King was motivated to march across the states and proclaim freedom? You think, you know, if you look at people that change the world, they're not doing it because they're motivated. They're doing it because they made a commitment to do it and they disciplined to see it through. Discipline is far more important than motivation, which is why you've got to be careful the decisions you make. Because once you make the decision, you have to see that decision through. Like my mentor says, first we make the decisions, then the decisions make us. So you've got to be very careful the decisions you make. Be very careful the commitments you make. Motivation, I'm telling you now, is completely overrated. It's important, don't get me wrong. You know, we meet according to motivation, we feel good, rah-rah, but that'll fade. You need a stronger will and a deeper commitment to see things through.
Tell me about that relearning process. It seems to me like that specific thing is something that really discourages people. They don't know what to do when they hit that relearning kind of fork in the road. What do you do when you get there?
Well, I mean, I think a part of the problem is sort of the mental perspective and disposition we've taken to the learning question. So what we've done in South Africa is we've gone, and it's not a South African thing. I mean, I think it's a global challenge. Is you learn to pass, and you'll hear often, even in business schools, you're finding it today, where learners will ask the lecturer about, is this in the exam? And that speaks to sort of the disposition we've taken to the education and the learning, which is I learn to pass, and I want to know what's in the exam so I can learn that, so I can answer that question, so I can move on. Learning in the new world is about learning to know so that you don't need to know what you know. And this is where it becomes really complex. When you know what you know, it means you haven't learned it yet because it means it's still conscious in your mind. It's when you start using it, not knowing that you've learned it, that it becomes internalized in you. That's really when you've learned. And that's why this relearning thing has become so important. The world we live in is changing really fast. I mean, in 1960, the amount of computing power Neil Armstrong had to send him to the moon was less than the amount of computing power you have in your cell phone right now. Right? And he yet created one of the greatest feats of the 20th century. So the world has changed, and if it has, so too do how we need to approach the learning process and understand that there's actually no such thing as a complete. There's no pass anymore. The pass is every day. It's a perpetual pursuit, and you're always looking to get better.
One of the things I have learned to do, and I'm not yet perfect at it, but I'm learning, is I'm learning to see time in context. Because what happens with us is when you are in the moment is so intense that your whole entire life can be consumed in it. But time is a continuum, right? So you learn to see moment as a part of the continuum, not as everything. So when I go through challenges, I just remember it's part of the continuum. It started, so it must end, and then something must carry on. There must be life after this, as there was before it. Not easy, I have to tell you. Not easy. Very difficult. I have been close to losing it all more times than you can imagine.
So the other day I bumped into a young lady and she asked me a question about a blog article I'd recently written. So I recently wrote a blog article and I was talking about failing in business, in fact, failing in life generally, but failing in business and this concept of failing forward. And she just didn't get it. She was like, what do you mean by this failing forward thing? You're either failing or you're succeeding, right? And the answer is no, you're not either failing or succeeding. You know, the whole thing about failing forward is about what you take out of the failure. So let me put it to you this way. People think failing is something that only happens at the beginning of your business journey. The truth is, failing is something that happens in life, all throughout life, and it's something that's going to happen in your business journey, all throughout your business journey. You're not always going to get things right, and things are not always going to go your way. So very recently, certainly since I've made the decision to start my growth fund and start financing entrepreneurs, start working in a space as a venture capital, and I don't come into the VC space as do many other people. You know, I'm raised by a single mother. I'm Welukshini, started my own business myself. So I don't come from a legacy of money. So for me, losing money is a very personal thing. It's like money I've worked for. It's not just money that fell off a tree. And I started investing in entrepreneurs, and some you win, some make money, and some you lose. Some you actually lose your investment. In my books, that's failing. If I take money and I give it to an entrepreneur and I invest in them, and they don't succeed, and in turn I lose my money, that's failing, right? So the question then becomes, even in my own situation, how does this failing forward principle apply? And here's what I think you need to realize as an entrepreneur. Knowledge is not a finite commodity. Knowledge is a fluid construct. So it's something you're always in the process of acquiring. You'll never have all the knowledge there is. Even today, I don't know everything there is to know about my business, about my industry. I try to. I stay ahead of the curve. I know more than most, but I don't know everything. It's just not possible. So when you understand that knowledge is a fluid construct and not a finite commodity, then you realize that the purpose for failure in your life is to accelerate your knowledge process. Certainly the knowledge acquisition process. The reason you fail is because there's something you must learn so that you don't fail at the same thing again. That's what failing forward means. So if you're watching this video and you're an entrepreneur and you're close to closing down, you don't have money to pay your suppliers, you don't have money to pay your staff, the question you need to ask yourself is this: what lesson am I learning at this time? And what am I going to do in future to make sure I am never here again? That's how you fail forward.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag Believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from David Goggins, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Are actually the ultimate training ground for what you're going to, encounter in life. You start looking at your past very differently. Without my self-discipline, there is no David Goggins.